The smell of fresh bread still lingered in my kitchen that morning. 68 years old, and I was still baking for a family that barely noticed me anymore. "You're old and useless. Get out." Rachel screamed at me while my son Richard threw my heart medication in the trash. He covered my mouth when I tried to speak. But they didn't know my brother, General Thompson, was already driving to our house. What happened next changed everything. My name is Eleanor. For 42 years, I built a life in this house. Every morning, I woke before dawn to bake bread, clean, and care for everyone around me. The kitchen was my kingdom, small but filled with light, overlooking our quiet neighborhood. I loved the routine. It made me feel needed, wanted, alive. My son Richard lived here with his wife Rachel. They moved in after my husband died, saying they needed to save money for their own place. That was 3 years ago. I paid for everything. Utilities, groceries, even helped with their car payments. My pension disappeared into their young lives like sugar dissolving in hot tea. This morning felt different. Heavy. Wrong. Rachel walked into my kitchen in her silk robe, phone glued to her hand. She ignored my "good morning" and went straight to the expensive coffee machine I bought her for her birthday. "Eleanor, there's a bill here," she said without looking up. "My new styling course. It needs to be paid today or I lose my spot." I looked at the amount on her phone. $4,000. My heart sank. "Rachel, we talked about cutting expenses this month," I said gently. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were cold, dismissive. Like I was a servant who'd forgotten her place. "This isn't a whim, Eleanor. It's an investment in myself. I can't look like a nobody. The charity gala is coming up. Important people will be there. It's good for Richard's career." Richard shuffled in, yawning. My 42-year-old son who still expected me to solve all his problems. "Mom, got anything to eat?" He tore off a piece of my warm bread, just like when he was little. For a moment, my heart softened. But only for a moment. "Richard." Rachel's voice cut through the air. "Tell your mother that some expenses are necessary." I watched my son's face. The same struggle I'd seen 1,000 times. He hated conflict. Always chose the path of least resistance. And that path was always me. "Mom, come on," he mumbled through the bread. "Rachel needs this." "What's the big deal? You have the money." But I didn't. I'd given them my last savings for their car insurance the month before. "I don't have that kind of money, Rachel," I said, my voice starting to shake. That's when something inside Rachel snapped. Her polite mask cracked, and pure rage poured out. "No money?" she shrieked. "You owe us everything. We live in this old dump, put up with you, and you can't pay one simple bill." She stepped closer to me. Her face twisted with hatred. "Who even needs you with your pathetic pension? You're old and useless. Get out. You hear me? Get out of our house." The words hit me like physical blows. I couldn't breathe. I opened my mouth to speak, to say this was my house, that I'd given them everything. But only a strangled gasp came out. My chest started hurting. Sharp, familiar pain. "Richard, my pills," I whispered, pointing to the small orange bottle on the counter. "My life-saving heart medication." That's when my son did something that destroyed my world completely. He didn't help me. He didn't stop his wife. He looked at me with cold, irritated eyes. Like I was bothering him. He walked to the counter, grabbed my pill bottle, and without a word, threw it in the trash under the sink. I gasped and stepped forward to get them. But Richard blocked my way, standing like a wall between me and my medicine. He was bigger, stronger. He just stood there, looking down at me. "Enough, Mom," he said quietly, harshly. "Stop making scenes." In that moment, everything went silent. Rachel's screaming, the kitchen sounds, everything disappeared. The warmth from my bread was replaced by ice-cold emptiness that spread from deep in my soul. One crystal-clear thought ran through my mind: the recipe failed. 42 years of rising dough had fallen flat. I stared into my son's eyes and felt nothing. No hurt, no anger, no pain. Just the deafening clarity of a ruined recipe. Something inside me that had been warm and alive turned cold and hard as stone. It was over. Completely over. I looked at him, my son blocking my path to life itself, and said nothing. Words crumbled to dust like old, stale bread. Rachel's screams faded to background noise. She was saying something victorious to Richard, but I wasn't listening. I just stared at his massive figure, his tense back. He wasn't just a person anymore. He was a wall. A wall I'd built brick by brick with my love, my sacrifices, my forgiveness. And now that wall stood between me and my future. Even if that future was just a few more heartbeats without those pills. I turned around slowly, very slowly. My movements were smooth, almost dreamlike. Inside me was no panic. The ice-cold calm that replaced my pain controlled my body like an experienced puppeteer. I walked past the kitchen table. The bread still smelled warm and inviting. This scent that had symbolized my home and love now seemed like an aroma from another life. A life that no longer belonged to me. I walked down the hallway. Each step echoed in the deafening silence of my new world. I passed the dark wooden coat rack my husband and I bought at our first garage sale together. The heavy framed mirror where I saw myself every day as a tired but needed woman. Today I glanced at it and didn't recognize myself. A stranger looked back, elderly, with deep lines around her eyes, but her gaze was absolutely calm, unreadable. I silently took my old but good coat from the rack, put it on, grabbed my purse hanging on the hook. Inside were my passport, some money, my phone. Everything I needed. "Mom, where are you going?" Richard's confused voice came from behind. His voice held no concern, only bewilderment. Like a part in a well-oiled machine had suddenly started moving wrong. I didn't turn around, didn't answer. What could I tell him? That I was walking away from 42 years of my life. That I was going to find air because I couldn't breathe in this house anymore. Words would be meaningless. He wouldn't understand. I turned the key in the lock. The click sounded thunderous in the apartment's silence. I opened the door, stepped onto the landing, and just as quietly closed it behind me. I didn't know if they heard me leave. I didn't care. The winter air hit my face, but I barely felt it. The cold inside me was stronger than any frost. I walked through familiar streets without thinking about where I was going. My feet carried me to the small park where I used to walk when Richard was little. Now it was empty and unwelcoming. Bare tree branches stood black against the gray sky. I sat on a cold, frost-covered bench. I sat and breathed deeply, rhythmically. In. Out. The air burned my lungs but brought clarity. And then, in that silence, under the gaze of gray city crows, I finally let myself think. Thoughts flowed slowly, without emotion. This wasn't an explosion of hurt, but calm, methodical analysis. Like an accountant balancing yearly books, I sorted through my life, my investments, and my losses. The truth I'd hidden from so long behind rituals of care and fresh-baked bread was now simple and ugly. They don't see me as a mother. They don't see me as human. I'm a resource to them. A useful commodity they can mine until it runs dry. The apartment isn't a family nest, it's an asset. My pension isn't my living expenses, it's their extra income. My time isn't a gift of love, it's free service. My care isn't expression of feelings, it's expected duty. And throwing away my medicine wasn't just a cruel act in the heat of argument. It was logical action. When a resource starts demanding rights, when it says, no, you need to shut it up, turn it off, take away its voice. And if necessary, its life. Because a broken resource that no longer brings benefit, only creates problems, needs to be disposed of. Like old, useless trash. I sat on the icy bench, and I wasn't cold. This conclusion brought me no pain. It brought me freedom. Terrible, ringing, absolute freedom of someone who has nothing left to lose, because everything was already lost. I took out my phone from my purse. My fingers didn't tremble. I found a number in my contacts I hadn't used in years. Paul Richardson, my father's old friend, a first-class lawyer. The phone rang for a long time. Finally, his slightly gravelly business voice answered. Speaking. Paul, hello. This is Eleanor Thompson, Victor's daughter. Eleanor, hello, sweetheart. How many years has it been? Something wrong? His voice was calm, but I caught notes of concern. Everything's fine, I answered evenly. I need your consultation. About real estate. It's urgent. When could you see me? For you, even tomorrow. Come at 10. Thank you. I'll be there. I ended the call. The first step was taken. But there was a second, equally important step. I found my brother's name in my contacts. My older brother Robert, a retired general. We rarely saw each other. Life had scattered us to different bases, different cities. But I knew that somewhere in this world was a person for whom I wasn't a resource. For whom I was still his little sister. He answered almost immediately. His voice, deep and calm, was the complete opposite of my son's confused mumbling. Eleanor, something happened. I didn't start crying or complaining. The time for tears had passed. Robert, hello. Yes, there's a matter. Family business. I see, he said shortly. In that simple word was everything: attention, readiness, strength. I might need your help next week. Nothing concrete yet. Just please stay available. And if I ask you to come. I didn't finish. I'll come, he cut me off. His voice held not a drop of doubt. He didn't ask what happened, who was at fault, why he was needed. He simply said, I'll come. I'll be ready, little sister. Hold on. Thank you, Robert. We said goodbye. I put the phone back in my bag. My brother's voice was like balm on a wound I didn't know I had. It didn't heal it. No. But it created a protective field around it. The feeling that behind my back was no longer emptiness, but a granite cliff. I got up from the bench. The sun never came out, but it seemed the world had become a little brighter. I knew what to do. For the first time in many years, I knew exactly what to do. The recipe of my old life had failed. Time to write a new one from scratch, by my own rules. I didn't go to friends or distant relatives. Their questions and sympathy would be unnecessary now. They would try to reconcile, find compromise where none existed anymore. I didn't need pity. I needed silence. So I rented a room in a small, modest hotel near downtown. Faceless, clean, with a window facing a busy street. It didn't smell like bread here. It smelled like hotel starch and anonymity. And that was exactly what I needed. First, I went to a pharmacy. The woman pharmacist in the white coat looked at me sympathetically, listened to what medications I needed, and without unnecessary questions handed me the precious bottle. I paid, put it in my purse, and its modest weight at the bottom of my bag seemed heavier than all the treasures in the world. This was mine, bought with my money, my right to the next breath. In the hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed with its stiff bedspread. The silence was oppressive but not depressing. It was like a clean canvas on which I could see the patterns of my past life without the usual distractions. I knew what was happening in my apartment right now. I could almost physically feel it. Surely after my departure they stood in bewilderment for a few minutes. Richard probably mumbled something like, "She's overreacting," or, "It's her age." Rachel, recovering from her rage attack, would have snorted and gone to get ready. She had an important event that evening, the charity dinner. The pinnacle of her social life. I knew how she'd prepared for it. A dress bought on credit, shoes that would hurt her feet later but looked prestigious. All of it was a little theater for one actor, where she played the role of a successful and generous socialite. I imagined her spinning in front of the mirror while Richard sat on the couch, buried in his phone. They, of course, decided I was just being dramatic. Went for a walk to cool off. Maybe to a friend's to complain. They were sure I'd return. Absolutely sure, because in their coordinate system, I couldn't not return. Where would I go? An old, dependent woman, tied to them and to my home. Their world was simple and understandable. They were the center of the universe, and I was its service planet, always rotating in the assigned orbit. They couldn't even imagine that a planet could simply leave orbit and fly into open space. My role in their evening was also predetermined. I was supposed to sit at home, wait for their return, maybe prepare something light for the night, and most importantly, ensure the financial stability of their beautiful life. The card linked to my pension account, which Rachel called our shared card, was with her. Hours on the hotel room wall silently counted minutes. I didn't turn on the TV or lights. I just sat in the gathering dusk and waited. I knew the call would come. It was as inevitable as day and night changing. And it came around 9 p.m. The sharp, demanding ring of my mobile phone sounded like an alarm in the room's silence. The screen showed, "Richard." I let it ring a few more times, then calmly answered. "Yes, Richard." "Mom, what's happening?" His voice wasn't just angry, it was furious, humiliated. In the background, I heard noise, music, and muffled voices. "What's happening, son?" I asked in an even, colorless tone. Your card didn't go through." Rachel, she was embarrassed in front of everyone. I closed my eyes, and the picture appeared before me as if alive. The shining hall, crystal chandeliers. Rachel in her best dress with a champagne glass. The host announces the charity collection and she, wanting to shine, loudly, so all her friends could hear, names a large sum. She hands the waiter with the terminal our shared card. A second of waiting. And then quiet but even more humiliating whisper, "Declined." Declined again. Her friends' faces, full of fake sympathy and poorly hidden malice. Her pale, distorted face, the collapse of her entire little performance. "I'm at the charity dinner right now," Richard continued screaming into the phone. "Rachel wanted to make a donation. Do you understand how we look? I thought. Not she, but we." He always said we when it came to their desires and their reputation. "I can imagine," I said just as calmly. "What did you do? Did you block it?" "Why?" "This is some petty revenge for the morning argument." Petty revenge. He couldn't even allow the thought that this wasn't a game, not a whim, that these were consequences. Simple and logical consequences of their actions. "I blocked all my cards, Richard, and closed access to my accounts," I replied, weighing each word. Silence hung in the receiver for a second. He was processing the information. Have you lost your mind?" he whispered. Because of some argument, you're depriving us. I heard him cover the receiver with his hand, but his irritated voice still reached me, muffled like from underwater. He was talking to Rachel, who was apparently standing nearby, crying from humiliation. Calm down. She's just acting up. Having a tantrum. Tomorrow she'll return when she needs her pills. Where will she go? And at that moment, the last, thinnest thread that still somewhere deep in my soul connected me to him burned to ashes. Not even ashes remained. Pills. He still thought he held me on that short leash. He was so sure of my helplessness, of his power over me. This wasn't just delusion. This was complete, absolute misunderstanding of who I had been all my life and who I became that morning. I silently pressed the hang-up button. I got up, walked to the window, and looked at the unfamiliar street, the stream of cars, people hurrying somewhere. I was no longer part of their small, suffocating world. I was here, in this faceless room, alone. And for the first time in long years, this loneliness didn't frighten me. It was like clean, frosty air after a stale basement. I took the new, full bottle of pills from my purse and placed it on the nightstand by the bed. It stood there like a small lighthouse, like a symbol of my newfound independence. Let them wait. Let them think I'll return, humiliated and submissive. They were wrong. Their calculation was correct for the woman I was yesterday. But that woman no longer exists. This morning, another was born in her place. And she will never return anywhere. The next morning was gray and damp. I woke early out of habit. For the first time in many years, I didn't need to get up and go to the kitchen, make dough, brew coffee. This emptiness in the morning hours was strange, unfamiliar, but not unpleasant. I drank a glass of water, took my medicine from the new bottle, and calmly got ready. At 10 a.m. I had an appointment that would determine my future. Paul's office was in an old building downtown. Inside it smelled of paper, good tobacco, and something else elusive, the smell of confidence and law. He himself had barely changed. The same thick gray hair, strict glasses, and penetrating gaze that seemed to see right through you. Eleanor, he rose from behind the massive oak desk and warmly shook my hand. Glad to see you, though I sense the reason isn't joyful. Tell me. And I told him. Without tears, without unnecessary emotions, dry and factual. I spoke about years of living under one roof, constant financial contributions, the disrespect that became normal, and ended my story with the kitchen scene about the thrown-away pills, about Rachel's words, about the wall my own son became for me. Paul listened silently, not interrupting, only his fingers slowly tapping on the desktop. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, looking out the window. Clear, he said finally, turning to me. One question, what do you want, Eleanor? I looked him straight in the eyes. The icy calm that had settled in me 2 days ago hadn't gone anywhere. I want them out of my apartment. He nodded, as if expecting exactly this answer. That's your legal right. The apartment is registered only to you. Only to me. My husband and I bought it before Richard's marriage. Good. So the procedure is standard. Eviction. It's unpleasant, long, but absolutely legal. First I need all the documents for the apartment, deed of ownership, purchase agreement. Everything you have. I nodded. They're at home in my closet, in a special folder. You'll need to get them. Can you? I thought for a moment. Return there, to that atmosphere, but it was necessary. Yes, I can. I'll choose a time when they're not home. Excellent. As soon as I have the documents, I'll prepare an official eviction notice. And from that moment, the countdown begins. I left his office with a sense of accomplished duty. The first legal step was taken. Now remained the most difficult, return to the house that had stopped being mine. I knew their schedule. Rachel went to the fitness club on Wednesdays, then for a manicure. Richard usually stayed late at work. I had a window of a couple hours. I approached my door, and my heart clenched for a moment. But I drove away this weakness. I wasn't a guest. I was still the owner of this house. I inserted my key in the lock and quietly entered. The apartment was quiet and empty, but the air was saturated with tension. In the kitchen on the table stood dirty dishes. My bread that I'd baked that morning lay on the cutting board, dried and untouched. They hadn't even touched it. This sight hit me harder than I expected. It was so telling. They didn't need my bread. They didn't need my care. I quickly went to the bedroom where all important documents were kept in the large wardrobe, in the far corner. I opened the door. On my shelf, where perfect order always reigned, everything was ransacked. My old photo albums, a jewelry box with memorable trinkets, everything was moved around. I frowned. This wasn't like Richard. He never went through my things. The document folder was in its place. I reached for it, but when I pulled it out, my hand hit something else, shoved deep into the shelf behind a stack of bed linens. It was a bundle of letters. A thick bundle of envelopes with blue and red stripes. Official notices. All in my name and all unopened. The cold that I thought had already reached its limit became even denser, almost physically tangible. I recognized these envelopes. The mail carrier sometimes left them with the concierge when I wasn't home. But I'd never seen them. Not one. So they were being collected and hidden. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same one I'd slept in for almost 30 years, and opened one of the envelopes, the top one. It bore the stamp of some commercial bank, a name I'd never seen before. Inside was an official form. I ran my eyes over the text. The words were bureaucratic, dry, but their meaning was like a thunderbolt. We notify you of outstanding overdue debt. In case of non-payment within the specified period, the bank will be forced to foreclose on the collateral property. Collateral property. My apartment. My vision went dark. I opened the second envelope. The third. All were from the same bank. Warning. Notice. Final demand. A debt I had no idea about. I went back to Paul's office without calling. I just burst into his office, pale, with a bundle of letters in my hand. Here, I put the letters on his desk. I found this in my closet. I never saw them. I never took any loans. He took one of the letters, quickly scanned it, and his face became serious. Very serious. Eleanor, sit down, he said gently but insistently. Give me an hour. I'll make a couple calls. That hour I spent in his waiting room, staring at one point. I felt nothing. My brain refused to believe what I suspected. It was too monstrous, even for them. After an hour, Paul called me back in. On his desk lay a printed document sent by email. He silently pushed it toward me. It was a copy of a loan agreement for a huge, unimaginable sum. A sum comparable to the cost of a good car and a luxury vacation. And in the borrower field was my name, Thompson Eleanor Victoria. And at the bottom, my signature, clumsy, crooked, but carefully trying to look like mine. A forgery. The contract was concluded 6 months ago, and then everything fell into place. Their sudden vacation to the Maldives that they said they'd saved for. Rachel's new car that she supposedly got in a favorable lease. Her endless courses, purchases, restaurants. All of it was bought with money borrowed against the only thing I had, my apartment, my life. I looked at this fake signature, and there was no shock in me, no surprise. Only a dull, blunt confirmation of the most terrible guess. The thrown-away pills weren't just an act of cruelty. It was the finale of a long, calculated operation. They didn't just want me not to interfere. They were waiting. Waiting for me to become completely weak, sick, incapacitated, or simply not exist anymore, so they could take over everything without hindrance. The plan wasn't to push me aside. The plan was to erase me completely. "Paul," I said, and my voice sounded surprisingly firm. "File the eviction notice and prepare another lawsuit for fraud." He looked at me with deep sympathy, but there was respect in his eyes too. "This will be war, Eleanor." "I know," I answered. But I realized one thing. They took everything I loved from me. Now I have nothing to fear. Absolutely nothing. Leaving Paul's office for the second time, I felt different. If in the morning I was a person taking a risky but necessary step, now I was a soldier who had received irrefutable intelligence about the enemy's plans. An enemy who had slept under the same roof with me all this time, eaten my bread, and smiled to my face. The horror of discovery was replaced by cold-as-steel determination. All my former life, all my sacrifices, all my blind maternal love appeared before me in a new, ugly light, as stages of a well-planned scam. I returned to my faceless hotel room, but now it didn't seem foreign. It had become my headquarters, my fortress, a place where I could think and plan without being distracted by ghosts of the past. I knew I had several days while the lawyers prepared documents, and I used this time to finally cut all threads connecting me to their world. Methodically, one by one, I deleted all shared photos from my phone. Here they are at the country house, smiling against the backdrop of my roses. Here's Richard with Rachel by the sea on that very vacation paid for by my apartment. Here's New Year's dinner at the table I set for 3 days. Each deletion was like a small surgical incision, cutting away infected tissue. It brought no pain, only relief. As if I was shedding a heavy, dirty burden. I didn't wait for their calls, and they didn't call. I was sure they perceived my departure and card blocking exactly as Richard had suggested in his conversation with Rachel, as a dramatic gesture, a tantrum. They probably decided to let me cool off, being absolutely sure that need and habit would soon force me to crawl back, ask forgiveness, and reopen access to my resources. Their confidence in my weakness had now become my main weapon. They expected me to break. They couldn't even imagine I was building barricades. 3 days passed. 3 days of silence. I went for walks in the park, drank coffee in small cafes, read a book I hadn't been able to finish for 6 months. I lived a simple, uncomplicated life and felt with each hour how I was returning to myself, to the Eleanor who existed before she became simply Mom and Eleanor Victoria. On the 4th day, in the afternoon, as I sat by the window in my room watching busy city life, my phone vibrated. A message from Paul. Short as a gunshot, ready. Courier on the way. I put down the phone and began to wait. I knew what would happen now. In my former apartment, in my living room, on the sofa upholstered with fabric I'd chosen myself, sat Richard and Rachel. Most likely they were watching some TV show or discussing weekend plans. They were relaxed, annoyed by my absence but not alarmed. In their world, nothing had changed. The sun still rose and set, and I, in their opinion, was still somewhere in my orbit, just temporarily hidden behind clouds. And then the doorbell rang. Not the phone, but the real one, sharp, insistent. I imagined Richard lazily getting up to answer. At the threshold stood a man in courier service uniform with a tablet and thick envelope of expensive paper. Does Eleanor Victoria Thompson live here? That's my mother. She's not home. What's this about? Richard probably asked, already starting to frown. I need to deliver an official notice. Please sign. Since she's registered here, you, as an adult family member, can accept it. Richard probably shrugged. Who knows what correspondence might come? Ads. Greetings. He signed the tablet, took the envelope, and closed the door. "What's that?" Rachel asked without looking away from the TV screen. "Something from Mom. Probably another paper from the pension fund." He carelessly opened the envelope. And at that moment, their cozy, predictable world collapsed. I didn't see their faces, but I could imagine them with absolute precision. First, bewilderment. At the top, on the document header, they saw the name of a well-known legal firm. Then they ran their eyes over the first lines, and that's when their faces must have begun to change. The words were cold, merciless as surgical instruments. Eviction notice based on housing code articles. As the owner of residential premises, I demand that within 30 days you vacate the apartment belonging to me by right of ownership. In case of refusal, a court action for forced eviction will follow. Each word hit the target. This wasn't a request, not a threat from an offended old woman. This was an official, legally binding document. The beginning of the end. I'm sure Rachel reacted first. Her disbelief quickly turned to panic. "What is this? What is this? She's joking. Your mother's lost her mind." And then my phone exploded. I calmly looked at the screen where Richard's name was flashing. One missed call, second, third. Then calls from Rachel started. Alternating, their panic was almost tangible. It oozed through the speaker even without answering the call. Finally, I decided they'd ripened enough. I answered Richard's next call. Mom, what is this?" His voice was breaking. There wasn't a shadow of his former condescension or irritation. Only pure animal fear. "We got some letter from a lawyer." "Is this a joke?" "No, Richard, this isn't a joke," I answered in the same icy, calm voice I'd spoken to him with last time. But how can you? You can't evict us. We're your family. Where will we go?" Family, I thought. What a convenient word. They remembered it only when the ground disappeared from under their feet. "You have 30 days to resolve this question," I said, repeating the phrase from the notice. 30 days. Are you out of your mind? Rachel's hysterical. You want to leave your son and his wife on the street after everything we've done for you? This last phrase was so absurd I almost laughed. But I restrained myself. "I'm coming over right now. We need to talk." "Where are you?" "No need to come anywhere, Richard. Everything I wanted to say is outlined in that letter. My lawyer is Paul Richardson. His contacts are listed in the document. All further communication only through him." "What lawyer?" "Mom, stop this. This is insanity. You must come home and cancel all this immediately." His voice rose to a scream, full of desperation and helpless rage. He was still trying to command, trying to return me to the familiar orbit, but it was too late. "Goodbye, Richard," I said and hung up. I blocked his number, then Rachel's. I knew this wasn't the end yet. This was just the beginning of their agony. But the main blow was struck. Their world, built on my love and their lies, had its first deep crack. And now they knew the ground under their feet wasn't solid soil, but thin ice over an abyss. And that ice had begun to crack. 3 days later, I was sitting in the hotel lobby having coffee when I saw them burst through the entrance like two predators who tracked their prey. Richard, pale with dark circles under his eyes. His face had aged in these few days. Rachel with red, puffy eyes from crying, but they burned with unhealthy, angry fire. They rushed straight toward me. I didn't flinch. I calmly set down my book and took a sip of coffee, watching their approach. "There you are," Richard breathed, stopping at my table. He was breathing heavily as if he'd run a marathon. "We looked for you all night, called everyone." Rachel collapsed into the chair across from me without a word. And then the show began. She covered her face with her hands and shook with soundless sobs. These weren't quiet, bitter tears I'd seen from people experiencing real grief. This was a demonstration calculated for an audience, for pressure, for pity. "Mom, look what you've done," Richard pointed at his crying wife. "Look what you've driven her to. She didn't sleep all night. How could you? How did you have the nerve?" I silently looked at him, at his face distorted by anger and desperation. Nerve. He was talking to me about nerve. "We're family," he continued, lowering his voice to a passionate, pleading whisper. "Mommy, come to your senses. We made mistakes. I know. I was wrong. I'm guilty. Forgive me. Forgive us. Let's go home, and everything will be like before. We'll forget everything. This lawyer, we'll just call him and say it was a mistake. A misunderstanding." He tried to take my hand, but I smoothly moved it away. "No need, Richard." My calm tone seemed to anger him even more than screaming would have. Rachel raised her head. Her face was wet with tears. Her makeup had run, turning her into a pathetic parody of the socialite she so wanted to seem. "Eleanor Victoria," she stammered, and her voice rang with tearful, pleading notes. I was wrong. I said terrible things to you. I didn't mean it. It was all nerves. Please forgive me, I beg you. Don't destroy our lives. Don't throw us out on the street. Richard is your only son. You can't do this to him." She appealed to everything that worked before, my maternal love, my sense of duty, my fear of loneliness. They were performing the old, familiar play, not understanding that the audience in the theater was completely different now. I remained silent. I let them speak. I watched them swing from anger to pleas, from accusations to repentance. It was like watching death throes. They poured streams of words, manipulations, emotional blackmail on me, while I just sat drinking my cooling coffee. Finally they exhausted themselves. Richard heavily dropped into the chair next to Rachel, putting his arm around her shoulders. They looked at me with desperation and hope, waiting for my reaction. Tears, pleas, promises. Their entire arsenal was spent. The hotel lobby fell silent, broken only by the muffled hum of the street outside the window. And then I spoke. My voice sounded unusually loud in that silence, though I spoke almost in a whisper. "The fact that you threw away my medicine, Richard," I looked him straight in the eyes, "that was terrible, but it wasn't the worst thing." His face showed bewilderment. What could be worse? In his world, that was the limit of cruelty, the extreme point of conflict. I reached into my purse, not the one I'd run from home with, but another, bought the day before yesterday. Inside lay a neatly folded sheet of paper. A copy. The original was safely hidden at Paul's office. I slowly unfolded it and placed it on the table between us. The white sheet with black letters. But this, I said quietly, was much worse. I smoothly pushed the document toward them. They both stared at the paper. I watched their eyes run over the lines. Loan agreement, bank name, some with 6 zeros, and at the very bottom, circled in red marker by my lawyer, the signature, Thompson EV. I watched their faces. It was phenomenal and mesmerizing and terrible. I saw color slowly drain from Richard's face. It became deathly pale, almost gray. His lips parted but made no sound. Rachel stared at the paper with wide, horror-filled eyes. Her sobs instantly stopped. The tears dried. Pure, undisguised fear froze on her face. All their feigned rage, all their tears, all their manipulative game, everything evaporated in one moment, blown away like dust. They looked at this paper like a death sentence. I'm wondering, I continued in my quiet, even voice, cutting through the silence, what the bank security service will think about this signature. And the police. The criminal code, as far as I remember, doesn't like such artwork. Fraud in especially large amounts, committed by a group of persons by prior conspiracy. Sounds serious, doesn't it? Rachel quietly gasped and pressed her hand to her mouth. Richard raised his eyes to me. There was no longer any anger or desperation in them. Only emptiness. The emptiness of a person who understood the game was over. And he'd lost completely and irrevocably. All his fighting, all his pressure, all his confidence that he could break me down, everything crumbled to dust before this simple sheet of paper. He finally understood. He understood that I knew everything, and that I was no longer the mother who could be forced, persuaded, or intimidated. Before him sat a person who held proof of their crime in her hands. And this person was absolutely calm and absolutely ruthless. After that scene in the hotel lobby came a lull. Terrible, ringing quiet like before a storm. They left my table without saying another word. Richard supported Rachel under her arm. She seemed about to collapse. They moved like two ghosts who'd lost all will. The threat of exposure, fear of police and prison paralyzed them. They disappeared from my life for several days. No calls, no messages. I knew they hadn't given up. They were hiding, feverishly searching for a way out of the trap they'd dug for themselves. And they found one. Or so they thought. The call came on Saturday morning. The number was unfamiliar. I answered. This is my second cousin Vera, whom I communicated with occasionally. Eleanor, hello. Her voice was excited and full of sympathy. What's happening with you? Richard called me. He told me such things. Says you're having health problems, that you've withdrawn, won't talk to anyone. Doing strange things. We're all so worried about you. I listened and marveled. This was their last, most desperate and most disgusting attempt. Declare me insane. We decided to get together as a family, Vera continued. Support you, talk. Please come. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Only the closest family will be there. We need to help you. At their house. In my apartment. They were gathering a family council to put me on trial, lure me into a trap, and there, under pressure from sympathetic relatives, work me over. Force me to sign some papers, maybe a power of attorney. Present everything as if I wasn't in my right mind, and they were carrying children, saving their confused mother from herself and bad advisors like my lawyer. This was their final bet. All in. All right, Vera, I said calmly. Thank you for caring. I'll be there. Surprised silence hung in the receiver. She apparently expected resistance. Oh, how wonderful. We're really looking forward to seeing you. I hung up and immediately dialed another number. My brother's number. Robert, I said without preambles. The time has come. I need your help. Tomorrow. I briefly outlined the situation and their plan to him. He listened silently. Same address? He asked when I finished. Same address. What time should I be there? Come at 2:30. Not earlier. They should have time to start their performance. Understood, little sister. I'll be there. His voice was solid as granite. That's all I needed. The next day, exactly at 2 p.m., I entered my apartment. The living room was already full of people, Cousin Vera with her husband, Aunt Kate from the suburbs, a couple other distant relatives. Everyone looked at me with anxiety and pity. Richard and Rachel played the roles of grief-stricken children. He stood by the window, hunched over with a tragic expression. Rachel, pale in a modest dark dress, bustled around offering everyone tea. The atmosphere was heavy, saturated with false sympathy. They seated me in an armchair like an honored patient. "Dear Eleanor, how are you?" Aunt Kate began, sitting nearby. "Richard told us everything. Why did you do this, daughter? Why leave home? Things happen in families, but you can't act like this." I silently looked at them, at their faces full of sincere but misdirected sympathy. They'd already passed judgment on me. I was a crazy old woman, and my children were victims. Rachel took the floor. She stood in the middle of the room, hands clasped to her chest. Her voice trembled, tears stood in her eyes. This was a performance by a skilled actress. "Dear family, thank you for coming," she began in a tragic whisper. "We didn't know who else to turn to. Something terrible is happening with Mom Eleanor. She left home without warning anyone, blocked all accounts, hired some lawyer who sent us." She sobbed. "An eviction notice. We think she's fallen under someone's bad influence. She's become suspicious, says strange things. We're afraid for her. Afraid that some scammers will take advantage of her condition and steal her apartment." She paused, letting her words sink into the relatives' consciousness. They nodded sympathetically, whispered among themselves. "We just want to help her," Richard picked up, approaching and putting his arm around her shoulders. "We want to protect her. Maybe we need to arrange, well, guardianship, so she doesn't do something she'll regret, so no one can deceive her. We'll take care of her, as always." There it was. The final goal. Power of attorney. Declaring me incompetent. The relatives buzzed. Yes, right decision. Children wouldn't advise anything bad. Eleanor, listen to them. They want what's best for you. They all looked at me, expecting me to start crying, screaming, justifying myself, thereby confirming their version of my insanity. But I calmly looked at my watch. It was 2:25 p.m. I raised my eyes to Rachel, who was still performing her tragedy. "I think," I said loudly and clearly, and everyone immediately fell silent. "We're waiting for one more guest." At that exact moment, the doorbell rang. Short, authoritative, twice. Richard's face stretched. He wasn't expecting anyone else. Who could that be? But I knew. I knew exactly who stood behind that door. And I knew that in the next few minutes, their carefully constructed house of lies would collapse like a house of cards. The doorbell rang again. More insistent this time. Richard reluctantly went to answer. I heard him open the door. Then his voice, confused and slightly frightened. Hello. You're looking for someone. And then I heard it. The voice that could stop a rebellion with a single word. Deep, commanding, used to being obeyed without question. I'm looking for my sister. Eleanor Thompson. The silence that fell over the apartment was so complete you could hear a pin drop. Richard returned to the living room, pale as a sheet. Behind him walked a man who seemed to fill the entire doorway. My brother Robert. 72 years old, but straight as an arrow. Silver hair cut military short, steel gray eyes that seemed to see through everything and everyone. He wore a simple dark suit, but he carried himself like he was still wearing the uniform that had commanded respect for 40 years. The relatives shrank back instinctively. Even without knowing who he was, they felt the authority radiating from him. Robert's gaze swept the room, taking in every face, every detail. When his eyes found me, they softened just a fraction. Hello, little sister, he said, his voice gentle but still carrying that undertone of absolute command. Hello, Robert, I replied, standing up. The family members looked between us in confusion. This wasn't part of their script. I got your message, Robert continued, his eyes now fixed on Richard. About the family meeting. Thought I should attend. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. We didn't. Didn't what? Robert's voice cut through Richard, stammering like a blade. Didn't think Eleanor's brother should know about plans to declare her incompetent. The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Who are you? Rachel demanded, trying to regain control of her performance. Robert turned his full attention to her. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of decades of command. General Robert Thompson, retired. Eleanor's brother. And you are? I'm Richard's wife. Ah, yes. The one who called my sister old and useless. The one who screamed at her to get out of her own home. Rachel went white. I never. Please. Robert held up one hand, and she immediately fell silent. I have very good sources. I know exactly what happened in this kitchen 3 weeks ago. He walked slowly around the room, and everyone seemed to shrink as he passed. I also know about the forged loan documents. The fraudulent signatures. The systematic theft from my sister. The relatives began to murmur among themselves. This wasn't the narrative they'd been fed. General Thompson, Vera spoke up hesitantly. We were told Eleanor was having difficulties. That she needed help. The only difficulty my sister has, Robert said, his voice growing harder, is that she raised a son who repaid her love with theft and betrayal. He stopped directly in front of Richard. You threw away her heart medication. You stole her identity. You took a loan against her home without her knowledge. Richard was shaking now. We didn't, it's not. Son, Robert's voice was deadly quiet. I've interrogated enemy soldiers who were better liars than you. He turned to address the room. My sister asked me to come here today because she knew you'd been fed lies. She wanted you to hear the truth. From his jacket pocket, he produced a folder. These are copies of the fraudulent loan documents. Notice the signature. He held up one paper. And this is a copy of my sister's real signature, from her passport application. He held up another. Even from across the room, the difference was obvious. The bank's fraud investigation unit is very interested in these documents, Robert continued. As is the district attorney's office. Rachel made a small, strangled sound. Now, Robert continued, his voice taking on the tone he'd once used to address troops before battle, let me explain what's going to happen. First, Richard and Rachel will vacate my sister's apartment within the week. Not 30 days. 1 week. Second, they will make no further contact with Eleanor unless specifically invited to do so. Third, the criminal charges for fraud and forgery are being prepared as we speak. Whether they're filed depends entirely on their cooperation. The room was dead silent. And fourth, Robert's eyes swept the room, landing on each relative in turn. If I hear that anyone in this family has bothered my sister, questioned her competence, or suggested she needs help managing her affairs. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Are we clear? The relatives nodded frantically. Richard slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. Rachel was crying again, but these weren't the theatrical tears from before. These were tears of genuine terror. Eleanor, Robert said, turning to me with that same gentle tone he'd used when we were children. Do you have everything you need from here? I looked around the apartment that had been my home for so many years. The kitchen where I'd baked countless loaves of bread. The living room where I'd hosted family dinners. The bedroom where I'd slept beside my husband for 20 years. None of it felt like mine anymore. Yes, I said quietly. I have everything I need. Robert offered me his arm. Then let's go home. As we walked toward the door, I heard Vera's shaky voice behind us. But where will you live, Eleanor? I turned back one last time. I'm buying a small house in the countryside. There's a big kitchen where I can bake bread. Not for ungrateful children, but for neighbors who'll appreciate it. And there's room for a garden. I'm going to grow my own herbs and vegetables. For the first time in 40 years, I'm going to live for myself. Robert squeezed my arm gently. As we walked down the hallway, I could hear the chaos erupting behind us. Relatives demanding explanations, Rachel sobbing, Richard's weak attempts at justification. But their voices grew fainter with each step. By the time we reached the street, they were just background noise. "Proud of you, little sister," Robert said as he helped me into his car. "It took me too long to find my backbone," I replied. "Sometimes the best steel has to be forged in the hottest fire," he said, starting the engine. "Where to now?" I thought about the small house I'd put a deposit on yesterday. White walls, a big kitchen window, a garden waiting to be planted. "Home," I said. "My real home."